The day began quietly in a remote valley far from human cities. Birds chirped softly in the cool morning air, and the scent of wet earth rose from the ground after a light rain. In the distance, the mountains stood tall, their peaks shrouded in thin clouds, and a gentle wind rustled through the grass. Everything seemed peaceful, as if the world itself were resting. But above this calm landscape, something extraordinary was approaching. A spacecraft unlike anything humans had ever seen moved slowly through the sky. Its surface shimmered with a silvery blue glow that reflected the morning sunlight in a dazzling display. The craft was smooth and organic in shape, without wings or engines that humans could recognize. Inside the spacecraft, the passengers were as curious as children experiencing a festival for the first time. They were aliens, scientists and explorers from a distant star system. Their skin shimmered in shades of green and silver, and their eyes reflected the light like polished gemstones. Each movement was precise and deliberate, yet there was an unmistakable excitement in their gestures. They had been watching Earth for many years, observing humans from orbit, recording their behavior, studying their culture, and trying to understand the strange variety of sounds that humans made. Music, in particular, fascinated them. They had listened to soft melodies, classical symphonies, and even human pop songs. All these sounds had calm effects on them. They could understand the emotions behind them, the happiness, the sadness, the joy. But nothing in their long journey through space had prepared them for what was about to happen. As the spacecraft descended into the valley, the aliens prepared themselves for a peaceful landing. Their mission was simple: explore, observe, and learn. They had no intention of interfering with humans. They had brought small translation devices to communicate if necessary, and carried tools to collect data without being noticed. The valley was quiet, empty except for the natural beauty around them. Flowers swayed gently in the breeze, and small animals watched curiously from the edges of the forest. Everything was serene, almost magical. The aliens landed softly on a flat stretch of grass, and the craft's surface settled quietly, making only a faint humming noise. The aliens stepped out carefully, taking their first steps on Earth's surface. Their multiple limbs moved in harmony, each step precise and controlled. They looked around, taking in the vibrant colors of nature, the patterns of the clouds, and the faint sound of running water from a nearby stream. One of the aliens, slightly taller than the others, extended a long, delicate hand toward the sky, as if to greet the planet itself. Everything seemed perfect for observation, a quiet and undisturbed place to begin their research. But then, far, off in the distance, a strange sound broke the silence. It was loud, chaotic, and unlike anything the aliens had ever encountered. At first, they thought it might be a natural phenomenon, perhaps a storm or a volcanic rumble. But the vibrations were too rhythmic, too structured. They tilted their heads and focused their sensitive auditory sensors, trying to understand. The sound grew louder, a combination of fast, heavy drumming, distorted strings, and voices that screamed with raw energy. It was coming from a hill, not far from where they had landed. Curious, the aliens moved closer, careful to remain hidden, but unable to resist investigating this new and unusual signal. As they approached, the source of the sound became clear. A group of humans had set up a massive sound system, complete with huge speakers and amplifiers. They were gathered in a circle, each person intensely focused on their instruments. Electric guitars screamed with rapid, distorted notes. The bass thumped like an earthquake, and the drums pounded relentlessly, echoing across the valley. The humans shouted lyrics that were aggressive yet strangely passionate, their hair flying, their bodies moving with the rhythm as if the music were controlling them. The aliens watched in disbelief, unable to comprehend the power and intensity of what they were witnessing. Their translator devices struggled to make sense of the vibrations, producing random and nonsensical words. One of the aliens reached out, attempting to feel the vibrations with their sensitive limbs. The energy coursing through the air was unlike anything their species had ever experienced. Their sensors began to overload, showing fluctuating patterns and extreme spikes. Some of the younger aliens whispered among themselves in rapid tones, expressing both fear and fascination. They had anticipated observing human culture, but they had expected calm, peace, or even simple joy. They were not prepared for this chaos. Yet, despite the confusion, something deep inside them was stirred. The music was powerful, full of life, and impossible to ignore. The humans, meanwhile, had not noticed the strange visitors yet. They were completely absorbed in their performance, lost in the intensity of their own creation. They moved and shouted with incredible energy, jumping, spinning, and pounding their instruments with almost inhuman strength. The valley seemed to pulse with the rhythm, the vibrations carrying across the ground and into the air. Trees shook slightly, and the nearby stream rippled as if the water itself were dancing to the beat. The aliens observed, some trembling, some fascinated, and some even laughing nervously at the sheer chaos unfolding before them. For a long moment, the aliens simply watched, unsure how to react. Their mission had been to observe, but they had never imagined encountering a sound so wild and unpredictable. They began to exchange signals among themselves, attempting to understand the music's structure. They noticed patterns, rapid sequences, of sounds, repetitions, and changes in intensity. Slowly, a realization began to form. This music, while chaotic and powerful, was deliberate. It was carefully crafted to express emotion, to tell a story in ways the aliens could not yet fully grasp. Despite the overwhelming intensity, a few of the aliens found themselves moving in rhythm, unconsciously mimicking the humans' movements. Their bodies responded in ways they did not expect, and a strange thrill ran through them. Even the leader, normally calm and methodical, felt an uncontrollable urge to engage, to join in, even though they could not physically play the instruments. The valley had become a stage for something extraordinary, a first contact unlike anything, recorded in the history of their species, and so the aliens stood there on the edge of understanding, caught between fear, amazement, and curiosity. The music continued, louder and more intense, filling every corner of the valley. The humans had no idea they were being observed, and the aliens had no idea how to respond. It was a moment suspended in time, the calm of nature interrupted by the raw, unstoppable energy of human heavy metal. For both species, this moment would be remembered forever, the day Earth's music made contact with the stars in a way no one could predict. The aliens froze as the sound grew louder, more intense and more chaotic. Their sensors were buzzing, their delicate limbs trembling slightly under the strange vibrations that moved through the air like invisible waves. They had expected to encounter humans, perhaps even to see them singing or dancing in simple, predictable patterns. But this pounding, screaming, electrifying storm of sound was beyond anything they had prepared for. They stepped cautiously closer, their multiple eyes scanning the humans, trying to understand what they were doing. From the aliens' perspective, the humans looked almost like wild creatures. Their hair flew in every direction, their bodies moved frantically, and their faces were filled with a mix of concentration, excitement, and complete abandon. One human jumped into the air, hitting a cymbal with a loud crash, while another twirled a guitar in a motion so fast it seemed impossible. The aliens tilted their heads, attempting to process the rapid movements and the even more rapid sounds coming from the instruments. Their translation devices were useless now, producing only strange buzzing sounds and blinking erratically. As they got closer, the vibrations began to affect the aliens' bodies in unexpected ways. One of the younger explorers stumbled backward, landing on the soft grass and flailing its limbs in a panic. Its companions tried to help, but even moving caused their bodies to resonate with the pounding music, making it almost impossible to maintain control. The sensation was unlike anything they had experienced in their controlled, quiet laboratories. It was raw, unfiltered, and full of energy that seemed almost alive. One of the aliens, slightly taller and more cautious than the others, extended a sensing limb toward the largest speaker. The vibrations traveled up its appendage, through its body, and into its core. It felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration, as if the sound itself were alive and trying to communicate. The alien emitted a series of clicks and hums, attempting to convey its astonishment to the others, but the music was too powerful. too loud to allow any meaningful communication. The other aliens began doing the same, trying to feel the rhythm and find patterns within the chaos. Some even started tapping their limbs in time with the drums without realizing it, responding to the beat instinctively. Meanwhile, the humans noticed something unusual. From the corner of their eyes, they spotted strange, shimmering figures moving near the edge of the hill. But instead of panicking, they assumed it was part of a costume, a visual effect, or a trick of the sunlight. They paid no real attention, continuing their performance with growing intensity. The guitars wailed, the drums pounded, and the human voices screamed in unison, creating a wall of sound that seemed impossible to resist. Even the wind seemed to carry the rhythm, rustling the trees and lifting leaves into the air like tiny dancers. The aliens, however, were struggling. One of them, a small and agile being, tried to take notes, projecting a holographic screen from its arm. But the vibrations caused the display to flicker, the images shifting so quickly that the alien could hardly read them. It sighed in frustration, or at least the closest equivalent their species had for a sigh, and tried to adjust its sensors to filter out the noise. But the music seemed to adapt, changing in intensity, tempo, and emotion in ways the aliens could not predict. Every time they thought they were beginning to understand, a new wave of sound crashed over them, resetting their perceptions. At that moment, something even stranger happened. The aliens' leader, normally calm and composed, began moving in a way that mimicked the humans' gestures. Its limbs swung in wide arcs, its body swayed, and even its antenna-like appendages twitched in rhythm. The younger aliens watched in shock, unsure whether to be alarmed or amused. Slowly, a few of them began to mimic these movements as well, and soon the group was moving in unison. Not because they understood the music fully, but because their bodies responded instinctively to the energy surrounding them. It was chaotic, uncoordinated, and completely mesmerizing to anyone watching. Some of the more cautious aliens tried to regain control by activating shields and sound-dampening devices. But the sheer volume of the music overwhelmed these systems. Sparks flew from protective circuits and small energy fields flickered before fading entirely. One alien accidentally triggered a light projector, sending swirling colors across the valley, which only added to the surreal scene. The humans, now noticing flashes of color combined with the intense music, assumed it was part of their show, and cheered even louder. The valley seemed to vibrate with life, alive with sound, light, and movement. As the chaos continued, the aliens began to notice something fascinating. Amid the screaming guitars and thundering drums, there were patterns, repeating sequences, sudden pauses, rises and falls in intensity, all carefully constructed by the humans, even if it looked wild and uncontrolled. Slowly, the aliens realized that this music was not random. It was deliberate, crafted to create a certain emotional effect. It was expressive, raw, and powerful in a way that went beyond mere sound. It communicated feelings, stories, and energy in a way their calm scientific analyses could not fully capture. Curiosity began to replace fear. Some aliens leaned closer to the speakers, feeling the vibrations through their limbs and into their cores. They began to analyze the tempo, the sequence of sounds, and the way humans interacted with each other during the performance. They discovered that the chaos was part of a structured system, a controlled explosion of energy that demanded attention. The more they observed, the more they were drawn in. Even the smallest movements of the humans conveyed meaning, passion, and connection. Hours passed, yet neither humans nor aliens seemed to notice the time. The valley was filled with sound, motion, and energy that seemed almost magical. Birds had long flown away, animals had retreated, and the wind carried the rhythm through every tree and bush. For the aliens, it was overwhelming, but exhilarating. They were experiencing something no one in their galaxy had ever encountered. It was raw, alive, and completely unlike any of their previous studies of music. Finally, one of the aliens, exhausted but fascinated, emitted a long, quivering hum that resonated with the vibrations of the valley. Its companions responded with clicks, chirps, and hums of their own. forming a strange, unspoken conversation layered over the human music. They were beginning to adapt, to understand the chaos not as a threat, but as a new form of communication. The leader, still moving in rhythm, extended a limb toward a human drummer, hesitating, unsure whether to make contact or simply continue observing. The humans, caught up in their own world, didn't notice, but the moment marked a turning point. This first encounter, chaotic and overwhelming as it was, became a moment of connection. The aliens had arrived expecting observation, but instead they had stumbled into an experience that challenged their senses, their understanding, and even their control. The humans, meanwhile, unknowingly shared their passion, energy, and creativity, creating an interstellar moment that neither species would ever forget. What began as confusion and fear slowly transformed into fascination and curiosity. The music, loud and wild as it was, had begun to bridge the gap between two worlds. One note, one drumbeat, and one scream at a time. The aliens had hoped to quietly observe, to record and understand human culture without causing any disruption. But by the time they had stepped closer to the hill, it was clear that those hopes were quickly disappearing. The music had grown, louder, faster, and more intense, shaking the ground with every drumbeat. The humans were completely absorbed, jumping, spinning, and screaming into their microphones, as if the entire world depended on the energy they were creating. The valley seemed alive, vibrating with the rhythm of the guitars and drums, and the aliens found themselves caught in a whirlwind they could neither escape nor fully comprehend. Almost immediately, the chaos began. The vibrations traveling through the air were unlike anything the aliens had ever felt. Their bodies, normally controlled and precise, started reacting involuntarily. One of the smaller explorers lost its balance entirely, tumbling backward onto the grass with a startled squeak. Its limbs flailed wildly, and its companions rushed to steady it, only to have their own bodies begin quivering in time with the pounding beats. The sensation was at once frightening and strangely exhilarating. Every vibration seemed to push them further from their normal calm state, and yet, in a way they couldn't explain, it was thrilling. The aliens' advanced technology, which had always worked flawlessly, began malfunctioning. Sensors flickered on and off, holographic displays shimmered uncontrollably, and even their translation devices started spitting out random clicks and buzzing sounds. They attempted to use sound dampening shields to protect themselves, but the music overpowered every defense. Sparks flew from the edges of their devices, lights flashed erratically, and a few pieces of equipment began spinning in the air as if trying to escape the vibrations themselves. The aliens exchanged nervous signals, a mix of alarm and astonishment. Nothing in their training had prepared them for a situation like this. Meanwhile, the humans had noticed something unusual at the edge of the hill. Strange, shimmering figures moved and flickered in the sunlight, but the humans were too absorbed in their own performance to stop. They assumed it was a visual trick of the sunlight or some planned stage effect. The music escalated further, the drumming becoming relentless, the guitars screaming with energy, and the human voices rising in passionate, almost uncontrolled intensity. One particularly daring performer jumped off a small rock, landing hard and continuing to play without missing a beat. The aliens watched, astonished, trying to keep track of every movement, every sound, and every energy pulse. The chaos reached its peak when the aliens realized that even their bodies were beginning to move on their own. The leader, who had been observing calmly, suddenly started swaying, its limbs swinging in rhythm with the drums. One of the younger explorers, trying to maintain composure, found its legs tapping involuntarily in time with the music. Soon, others followed, their movements uncoordinated yet strangely synchronized with the humans. The aliens had gone from careful observers to participants in the strange, wild energy of the scene. It was chaos, but a controlled chaos that seemed to have a rhythm of its own. Amid the confusion, a particularly adventurous alien decided to approach the humans directly. It extended its limbs cautiously toward a drum set, intrigued by the repeated beats that had caused so much reaction in its body. As it drew closer, the vibrations intensified, causing the alien's energy sensors to spike wildly. Sparks of light danced across its skin, and a low hum of excitement escaped its throat. The humans, seeing a shimmering figure near their instruments, assumed it was a special effect or perhaps another performer in costume. They continued playing, unaware of the true nature of their audience. The other aliens were now fully caught in the storm of sound. Some emitted nervous clicks and hums, trying to communicate distress, while others let out noises of exhilaration they had never used before. The valley seemed to echo with a mixture of human screams, guitar riffs, and alien sounds, creating a surreal symphony of chaos. Trees bent slightly under the invisible force of the vibrations, and the nearby stream rippled as if the water itself were dancing along with the rhythm. Even the wind seemed to participate, carrying the energy of the music across the valley, in waves. In the middle of this chaos, the aliens began to notice patterns within the music. The pounding drums were not random. The guitars followed sequences that repeated and evolved. The screaming voices told a story, one that conveyed emotion and passion in a way the aliens could not have imagined. Slowly, their fear began to shift into fascination. They realized that this chaos, this overwhelming storm of sound, was actually a carefully crafted form of expression. It was wild, loud, and intense, but it had structure, rhythm, and purpose. Some of the more curious aliens attempted to interact with the music in small ways. One projected holographic shapes that moved in time with the beats, creating a visual echo of the sound. Another extended a sensing limb toward the bass guitar, feeling the vibrations move through the instrument and into the alien's body. Even in the middle of chaos, the aliens found ways to engage, to connect with this new, intense form of communication. Their nervous energy slowly turned into enjoyment, and some even laughed at the absurdity of their situation. They were supposed to be scientists, observers, and here they were, dancing, albeit awkwardly, alongside humans who had no idea they existed. Hours seemed to pass in what felt like moments. The music continued to roar, unstoppable and relentless, and the aliens adapted bit by bit. They learned to anticipate the peaks and valleys, to feel the rhythm instead of merely hearing it. They discovered that their bodies could respond to the music in ways they hadn't known, moving instinctively with the beats, resonating with the vibrations, and even finding moments of calm amidst the storm. The humans, in turn, were completely immersed in their performance, unaware that they were teaching an entire alien species the energy and emotion of human heavy metal. As the sun began to lower in the sky, the aliens gathered together, catching their breath, at least as close to breath as their species required. They exchanged signals, clicks, and hums that conveyed a mixture of relief, excitement, and astonishment. The chaos, while overwhelming, had become a form of connection. They were no longer merely observers. They had become part of an extraordinary experience, something that could not be explained in words alone. The music had pushed them to the edge of their understanding and pulled them into a new realm of experience they would never forget. Even the leader, who had initially been cautious and precise, admitted through signals and hums that the experience was exhilarating. The aliens had survived the first wave of chaos, adapted to it, and even begun to understand it. The humans, blissfully unaware, continued their music, their energy shaping the very atmosphere of the valley. For the aliens, the moment was historic, a first contact of an entirely new kind, not through words or gestures, but through raw, unfiltered emotion expressed in music. By the end of the day, the valley had become a place of shared experience. Chaos had given way to fascination, fear had transformed into exhilaration, and observation had become participation. The aliens had learned something profound about humans in just a few hours, that their music, wild and chaotic as it seemed, was a language of emotion, passion, and energy. And while the humans would never know it, they had just created an interstellar moment of connection that neither species would ever forget. After hours of chaos and wild music, the aliens began to realize that simply observing was not enough. The humans' heavy metal had overwhelmed their senses at first, but now they were beginning to notice patterns, rhythms, and even emotional expressions hidden within the noise. The pounding drums, screaming guitars, and shouted vocals were more than random sound. They were communication, a story told through raw energy and rhythm. The aliens wanted to understand this story, but their usual methods, visual scans, auditory, analysis, and translation devices were proving insufficient. They needed a new way to connect. The leader of the group took the initiative. Using advanced holographic technology, it projected colorful patterns into the air, synchronized with the rhythms of the music. The shapes twisted, spun, and expanded in time with the drums, creating a visual representation of the sound waves. The younger aliens began experimenting as well, each projecting different forms of light, shapes, and colors, all moving to the music. The humans, finally noticing the strange lights, stopped for a brief moment, their eyes wide with amazement. At first, they thought it was part of a planned stage effect or a new kind of performance. They had no idea that the shimmering, colorful forms were attempts at communication from entirely different beings. Encouraged by their success, one alien extended a sensing limb toward a guitarist. Feeling the vibrations of the strings directly, the energy coursing through the instrument matched the alien's internal rhythms, creating a strange resonance that was both exhilarating and calming. The alien emitted a low hum, almost musical in response. Another alien joined in, creating a chorus of hums, clicks, and vibrations that matched the human's music. At first, it was chaotic. The sounds clashed, overlapped, and sometimes seemed to make no sense at all. But gradually, patterns emerged. The humans noticed the strange noises blending with their music, and though puzzled, they began to respond. Guitar riffs were matched with alien hums, drum beats synchronized with clicks and vibrations. A strange harmony was forming, bridging the gap between two completely different species. The aliens' fascination grew as they noticed subtle details in the humans' performance. They observed how the drummer's hands moved in precise sequences, how the guitarist's fingers formed complex patterns, and how the singers' voices shifted with emotion, telling stories of struggle, passion, and energy. The aliens had studied human music for years from orbit, but experiencing it live up close was entirely different. The music was no longer just sound, it was alive. It had power, intent, and emotion, and it was communicating directly to them in a way that transcended words. Some aliens attempted more interactive experiments. One projected a large, glowing holographic sphere that pulsed in time with the bass, expanding and contracting like a living heartbeat. Another created ribbons of light that moved around the humans, wrapping around the performers in a gentle embrace. The humans laughed and cheered, assuming it was an elaborate light show or a special effect for their concert. None of them realized that their audience was learning, adapting, and even beginning to participate in a subtle interstellar conversation. The leader of the aliens realized that traditional communication would not work here. Words, gestures, and even telepathy were overwhelmed by the sheer power of the music. Instead, they embraced the idea of emotional resonance. By matching their own vibrations, hums, and light patterns to the human's music, they could create a shared understanding. Slowly, the humans noticed the patterns in the lights and sounds. At first, they were cautious, unsure whether the aliens were hostile or friendly. But the energy was not threatening. It was playful, responsive, and, in its own strange way, complementary. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, the valley took on a surreal quality. The shadows of trees stretched long, the river reflected shimmering lights, and the alien projections danced in harmony with the humans' music. A new rhythm emerged, humans and aliens responding to each other in real time. The aliens realized that heavy metal, which had initially caused such chaos, could be a tool for connection. It was expressive, emotional, and even universal in its ability to convey passion and energy. The humans, sensing the interaction, began improvising, adjusting their music in response to the strange but compelling patterns of light and sound from the aliens. By the end of the day, a remarkable understanding had formed. The aliens could feel the emotions behind the music, interpret its intensity, and respond in ways the humans could recognize. They had not only survived the overwhelming chaos of heavy metal, they had learned to communicate through it. The leader emitted a series of low-frequency hums that resonated with the entire group, signaling satisfaction and curiosity. The younger aliens followed suit, experimenting with complex combinations of light and sound. The humans, caught up in the energy of the music and the unexpected visual spectacle, responded instinctively, creating a feedback loop of creativity, emotion, and rhythm that neither species had ever experienced before. As darkness began to fall, the aliens realized it was time to prepare for departure. They had learned an incredible amount, discovered a new form of communication, and experienced something completely unique. The humans, still lost in their performance, were unaware of the extraordinary impact they had made on beings from another world. The aliens projected one final holographic message, a swirling pattern of lights that translated roughly as, "We understand. Thank you." The humans, seeing the lights, cheered, assuming it was another part of their concert. With that, the aliens retreated to their spacecraft, their minds racing with excitement. They had not only observed human culture, they had participated in it in the most unexpected way. Heavy metal, a form of music that had initially caused panic and chaos, had become a bridge of understanding. They had learned that emotion, energy, and passion could transcend language, species, and worlds. And as they prepared to leave, they knew they were taking with them something far more valuable than any physical data: the knowledge that music could connect hearts and minds across the galaxy. The alien spacecraft rose slowly from the valley, the engines producing a soft hum that blended with the distant echoes of human music. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. The aliens were exhilarated, still processing the intense experience they had just endured. They had entered the valley expecting to observe quietly, but instead they had been swept into a whirlwind of sound, chaos, and emotion. They had survived, adapted, and ultimately learned to communicate through the raw energy of human heavy metal. It was an experience none of them would ever forget. As they left Earth's atmosphere, the leader reviewed the data collected. But the data was no longer just numbers, frequencies, or energy patterns. It was experience, emotion, and connection. The aliens had discovered that music could be more powerful than any words, more expressive than any gesture, and more universal than any language. Even though humans had no idea what had occurred, their music had bridged the gap between worlds, creating understanding where none had existed before. The younger aliens were still buzzing with energy. They replayed the experience in their minds, feeling the vibrations, recalling the chaotic energy, and remembering the strange, beautiful patterns of light they had projected. They laughed in clicks and hums, replaying moments where their own bodies had moved involuntarily to the music. What had initially been fear and confusion had transformed into joy, fascination, and admiration for humans and their creativity. The leader spoke to the group, using a series of deep hums and signals. The message was clear. The experience had been not only educational but transformative. They had learned something fundamental about life, emotion, and communication that no data, no textbook, and no observation from orbit could have taught them. Music was more than sound. It was a language of the soul capable of connecting beings across space and time. The aliens agreed, their hums and clicks forming a chorus of affirmation. As the spacecraft cruised through the atmosphere, the aliens decided to share a gift with the humans. Using small, unobtrusive devices, they left behind advanced instruments capable of replicating the vibrations, rhythms, and tones they had felt. These instruments were designed to help humans explore new levels of creativity and emotion in their music, tools that would expand the expressive power of their heavy metal. The aliens hoped that one day humans might realize these gifts were more than instruments. They were bridges to understanding and connection across the stars. Back on Earth, the humans continued their performance, unaware of the interstellar impact they had made. They laughed, screamed, and played with abandon, believing the lights and strange shapes to be part of their own artistry. But in the eyes of the aliens, the humans had just achieved something extraordinary. They had connected with a species from another world without even realizing it. Their music had become a universal language, capable of creating understanding, fascination, and joy across vast distances of space. As the spacecraft left the atmosphere entirely, the aliens began sharing recordings of the experience with their home planet. Other beings listened in amazement, fascinated by the intensity, energy, and emotion conveyed through the music. They studied the patterns, the chaos, and the responses of the aliens themselves. The story spread quickly. A planet where beings could communicate through sound and emotion, where music was more than art. It was connection. Earth had become legendary in ways no one could have imagined. Even though they were far from Earth, the aliens continued to experiment with the rhythms, vibrations, and emotional energy they had experienced. They replayed the music, analyzed their own responses, and created new forms of light and sound inspired by the humans' performance. Heavy metal, once chaotic and overwhelming, had become a source of inspiration, a way to explore creativity and emotion across species. They had discovered a universal truth: passion, energy, and expression could transcend worlds. Finally, the aliens reflected on the experience as a whole. What had begun as observation had become chaos, and chaos had turned into understanding. Humans, with their raw, intense, and unpredictable music, had unknowingly offered a lesson in emotion, connection, and creativity. The aliens had left Earth not only with data, but with a new perspective on life, communication, and the power of music. The valley, the humans, and the heavy metal performance would be remembered forever, not just as an event, but as a moment of interstellar history. And so the aliens continued on their journey, forever changed by a day in a quiet valley where human heavy metal had caused total chaos, but also created a bridge of understanding that spanned the stars.